and consider it extremely dangerous.
Welcome to the Horror Story channel, where nightmares come to life. Join us for spine-chilling stories of terror, creepy urban legends, and haunted places. If you're brave enough to face your deepest fears, hit the subscribe button for our latest horror stories. Without any delay, let's jump right into the story. The Forest's Lost Daughter. The forest was thick and dark, the trees towering above them like an impenetrable wall. Jack and Emily's daughter had wandered off while they were gathering firewood, and they'd been searching for hours. The fading light of the sun made it difficult to see, and the shadows seemed to twist and dance in the corners of their vision. They called out her name, again and again, their voices echoing through the trees. But there was no answer, no sign of her anywhere. Jack felt a tightness in his chest, a rising panic that threatened to overwhelm him. Emily's face was pale, her eyes wide with fear. They stumbled over roots and rocks, their feet sleeping in the mud. Jack's heart pounded in his ears, and he could feel the sweat trickling down his back. He tried to stay focused, to keep searching, but every rustling of the leaves made him jump. And then, they saw it. A small, decrepit doll lying on the ground. It was dirty and torn, its painted face twisted into a grotesque expression. Jack felt a cold, creeping sensation that made him want to turn and run. But Emily picked up the doll, turning it over in her hands. "This is hers," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. This is what she was carrying. Jack's heart sank. The doll exuded a malevolent energy, a darkness that made his skin crawl. He wanted to throw it away, to leave it there in the forest and forget they ever found it. But he knew they couldn't. They had to take it with them, had to bring it home and hope it would lead them to their daughter. Jack took the doll from Emily's hands and cradled it carefully. They turned and started back toward home, their hearts heavy with dread. The forest seemed to close in around them, the trees pressing down like a heavy weight. Jack felt a sense of unease, a creeping sensation that they were being watched. But they kept walking, their eyes fixed on the path ahead. They had to find their daughter, no matter what it took. After bringing the decrepit doll home, Jack and Emily thought their troubles were over. They believed that the doll would be a clue to their daughter's whereabouts. However, they soon realized that something was terribly wrong. Strange things began happening around the house. At first, they dismissed it as their imagination, but as the days went by, the strange occurrences became more frequent and intense. Objects moved on their own, doors slammed shut, and they heard strange noises coming from the doll. Emily felt a growing sense of unease every time she was near the doll. It wasn't just the fact that it was creepy and unnerving, but there was something else. It was as if the doll was watching her, following her every move, and waiting for the right moment to strike. Jack tried to rationalize the situation, telling himself that it was just his mind playing tricks on him. But even he couldn't ignore the strange things happening around the house. He began to suspect that the doll was alive and had a mind of its own. One night, as they were getting ready for bed, they heard a strange noise coming from the living room. They cautiously approached the source of the noise and found the doll sitting on the couch, its eyes glowing in the dark. As they watched in horror, the doll began to move on its own. It stood up, its limbs creaking and cracking with every movement, and began to walk towards them. Emily felt a sudden chill as she saw the doll's face contort into an evil grin. Jack reached for a nearby lamp and swung it at the doll, but it dodged his attack with ease. The doll then lunged at Emily, its eyes glowing brighter and brighter. Emily screamed as she felt the doll's cold hands wrap around her neck. Jack managed to pull the doll away from Emily and threw it across the room. They watched as the doll lay on the ground, motionless. But even though it wasn't moving, they could still sense its malevolent presence in the room. As they retreated back to their bedroom, they knew that they had to do something about the doll. They couldn't let it continue to haunt their house and terrorize their family. But they also knew that whatever they were dealing with, it wasn't just a simple doll. It was something much, much worse. Jack and Emily's search for their missing daughter led them to seek out the help of a local psychic. The air around them is thick with a palpable tension as they make their way to the psychic's house. The sky is a deep shade of blue, and the stars twinkle above them like tiny diamonds. The wind rustles through the trees, and the sound of leaves crunching underfoot is the only thing that breaks the silence. The psychic's house is old and weathered, with peeling paint and creaky floorboards. The front door is slightly ajar, and the eerie glow of candles flickers through the window. Emily hesitates, wondering if they should turn back, but Jack grabs her hand and leads her inside. The inside of the house is dimly lit, with candles casting strange shadows on the walls. The smell of incense fills the air, and the sound of chimes echoes through the hallway. They make their way to a back room, where the psychic is waiting for them. She is an older woman, with long gray hair and bright, piercing eyes. She greets them with a kind smile, and they take a seat in front of her. The psychic closes her eyes and takes a deep breath, and then begins to speak. "The entity that has taken over your daughter's body is a powerful one," she says, her voice low and gravelly. "It feeds on fear and negative energy, and it will stop at nothing to destroy you." Jack and Emily exchange worried glances. They know that they are in over their heads, but they are determined to do whatever it takes to save their daughter. The psychic continues, "You must be strong and have faith. The entity cannot be destroyed by physical means alone. You must use your love and positive energy to drive it out." She hands them each a crystal and instructs them to keep it with them at all times. "This will help to protect you from the entity's power," she says. As they leave the psychic's house, Jack and Emily are filled with a newfound sense of determination. They know that the road ahead will be difficult, but they are ready to face it head-on. They clasp hands and walk into the night, ready to fight for their daughter's life. The woods were darker than ever as Jack and Emily pushed deeper into the forest. The only sounds came from the crunch of their footsteps on the leaves and the occasional hoot of an owl. But as they approached the clearing where the malevolent entity was said to reside, the air grew thick with a sense of dread. Jack and Emily looked at each other, silently acknowledging the danger ahead. They stepped into the clearing and were immediately assaulted by a putrid smell that made them gag. The ground was littered with broken twigs, and the trees seemed to be twisted and bent out of shape, as if they were trying to flee from something. As they moved forward, they began to hear strange whispers on the wind, voices that seemed to be speaking in a language they couldn't understand. The voices grew louder and more insistent, until they were practically screaming in their ears. Jack and Emily drew their weapons and prepared for battle. They saw movement in the trees and aimed their weapons in that direction. Suddenly, the entity materialized in front of them. It was a grotesque figure with glowing eyes and long, sharp claws. Its mouth was twisted in a snarl, and its skin was slick with what looked like black blood. Jack and Emily felt a wave of fear wash over them, but they stood their ground. The entity lunged at them, its claws extended. Jack and Emily dodged to the side and counterattacked. The entity was fast and nimble, but Jack and Emily were skilled fighters. They fought with all their strength, determined to save their daughter. The battle raged on for what seemed like hours, with neither side gaining the upper hand. Jack and Emily were bruised and battered, but they refused to give up. They fought with everything they had, their love for their daughter giving them the strength to continue. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the entity let out a blood-curdling scream and disappeared into thin air. Jack and Emily stood there, panting and sweating, their weapons still at the ready. The air was thick with tension as Jack and Emily stepped deeper into the woods. They moved cautiously, each step accompanied by the crunch of leaves and twigs underfoot. The eerie silence that enveloped them was only broken by the sound of their breathing and the occasional snap of a twig in the distance. As they approached a clearing, they saw a figure standing in the center. It was their daughter, but she was different. Her eyes glowed with a malevolent light, and her body seemed to ripple and contort in unnatural ways. "Please," Emily called out, tears streaming down her face. "Please, come back to us." The figure didn't respond. Instead, it let out a bone-chilling shriek that echoed through the woods. From the darkness, a swarm of shadows emerged, surrounding them on all sides. Jack and Emily braced themselves for what was to come. They knew that they had to fight with everything they had if they were going to save their daughter. The shadows attacked with ferocity, striking out with razor-sharp claws and teeth. Jack and Emily dodged and weaved, using every trick they knew to stay alive. They fought back with all their strength, but the shadows seemed to be endless. Just when it seemed like they were about to be overwhelmed, a bright light shone from behind them. The psychic they had consulted earlier had arrived, and she was armed with a powerful talisman that glowed with an otherworldly energy. "Stand back," she shouted, her voice ringing out over the chaos. "I'll take care of this." With a flick of her wrist, the psychic unleashed a burst of energy that tore through the shadows, scattering them in all directions. The entity that had possessed their daughter let out an ear-splitting scream and began to thrash wildly. Jack and Emily saw their chance and charged forward, their hearts bounding with adrenaline. They struck out with everything they had, each blow landing with a resounding impact. Their daughter's body contorted and writhed, but they didn't let up. Finally, with one last, desperate strike, they destroyed the entity that had taken over their daughter's body. Their daughter fell to the ground, limp and lifeless. For a moment, there was only silence. Then, a soft groan escaped from their daughter's lips. She stirred, her eyes fluttering open. "Daddy," she said weakly, looking up at Jack with a mixture of confusion and fear. "It's okay," he said, tears streaming down his face. "It's all over now." Together, they made their way back to the safety of their home. Though they knew that their lives would never be the same, they were grateful to have each other. And as they huddled together in the warmth and safety of their home, they knew that they had overcome the greatest challenge of their lives. Emily sat in the living room, cradling her daughter in her lap. Jack and Emily breathed a collective sigh of relief. They had made it through the worst of it, but they knew that their lives would never be the same. The horror and trauma they had experienced would stay with them for the rest of their days, haunting them like a specter that refused to be banished. Over the next few days, they tried to go about their lives as best they could. But the memories of what they had experienced were never far from their minds. They would catch themselves staring off into space, lost in thought, unable to shake the feeling that they were being watched. Emily spent most of her time tending to their daughter, who seemed to be recovering slowly but surely from her ordeal. She would sit with her for hours, reading her stories and singing her lullabies, trying to soothe her and ease her fears. Jack, meanwhile, was consumed with a sense of restlessness. He felt like he needed to do something, anything, to make sense of what they had been through. He spent long hours poring over books and articles, trying to find some explanation for the malevolent force that had taken over their daughter's body. But no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't find any answers. The more he read, the more confused and frustrated he became. As the days turned into weeks, Jack and Emily slowly began to pick up the pieces of their shattered lives. They tried to return to some semblance of normalcy, but they knew that they would never truly be the same. And yet, even as they struggled to move forward, they couldn't help but feel a sense of gratitude. They were grateful to have their daughter back, and grateful for the strength and resilience that had seen them through the darkest of times. For as long as they lived, they would never forget the horror they had experienced. But they would also never forget the love and courage that had seen them through it. And in the end, that was what truly mattered. Thanks for listening to our horror story. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel for more terrifying stories.